I used to think people who survived real violence could always tell when danger was close. I thought there had to be some change in the air, some bad feeling that crawled up your back, some instinct that kicked in and saved you. That is something people say after the fact because they want the world to make sense. They want to believe the body warns you. Mine didn't. Mine let me make coffee, fold laundry, answer a stupid text from work, and stand in my own kitchen with bare feet on cold tile, while a man who had cut apart 6 people and buried 2 of them in crawl spaces was somewhere nearby, deciding whether I was going to live through the night. I did not know his name then. Everybody knows it now. At the time, he was just a face on the local news, one of those men you only half look at while rinsing a plate or changing the channel. He had escaped from transport after a court appearance in the city. 2 deputies dead, 1 in surgery, 1 civilian driver dragged from a truck and left in a ditch with his throat opened. There were blurry helicopter shots of a road closure, a line of police cars, and the same school picture they always use for men like that, even when the man is in his 40s, and the only recent photo is a mugshot. In the school picture, he looked shy and almost soft. In the mugshot, he looked like what he was. His hair had gone patchy around the temples. His eyes had that flat focus some people get after years of doing hard time, like every person in front of them is just another object in a room. His name was Daniel Vale, though a lot of people called him the Morrow Creek Butcher, because he killed 3 of his victims near the old service road by Morrow Creek. He was convicted on 4 murders and suspected in more. There were stories about what he had done to them. Some of it was proven, and some of it was just the usual mess that grows around cases like that. But enough of it was true. He tied women with extension cords. He kept them alive for a long time. He cleaned the bodies badly and left parts missing from some of them. One of the men he killed had every tooth removed after death and stuffed into his own jacket pocket. Another victim was found in a storm drain with both hands cut off and wrapped in grocery bags beside her. People love details like that. They repeat them because it lets them feel close to horror while they are still safe. I wasn't interested. I wish I had been. I was 32 and living alone in a rented house on the edge of a dying little town called Bell. It sat between a 2-lane highway and a strip of woods that used to be part of somebody's farm before the bank took the land in the 80s. The house was old but not charming. It had settled badly, so the hallway floor tilted just enough that a marble would roll from the bathroom door to the kitchen if you dropped one. The back porch sagged on one side. The windows were newer than the rest of the place, except for the small one over the sink that still had the old warped frame and the pane with a bubble in the glass. The landlord fixed only what he had to fix, but rent was cheap. And after my divorce, I needed cheap more than I needed nice. I worked at a physical therapy office in Dryden, 20 minutes away if traffic was normal. Most days I drove there, worked 8 or 9 hours, drove home, microwaved something, watched television, and went to bed with the sound machine on, because the house creaked too much in the wind. It was a small life, but it was stable. Stable had become my favorite thing. My ex-husband, Matt, used to say I was too cautious for my own good. What he meant was that I wasn't fun anymore. We had been married 7 years. By year 5, he was sleeping with a woman he met through work and borrowing money from my sister without telling me. By year 7, he was gone, and I was eating cereal over the sink in a rental house with a broken screen door. I was not dramatic about it. I was angry. then tired, then better. That is the plainest version. The truth is uglier in small ways. I checked his social media for months. I drank too much by myself on Fridays. I cried in the parking lot at work one afternoon because I saw a couple arguing over mulch bags at the garden center and envied them for still being at the stage where anger meant they were still in it together. Then time passed. By the fall that Daniel Vale escaped, my life had narrowed down to routine, and I was grateful for it. That is probably why it took me so long to understand that routine had been interrupted. I had trained myself not to overreact. Strange noise outside. Raccoon. Missing package. Delivery mistake. Bad dream. Hormones. Stress. Too much coffee. I had spent enough years trying to become reasonable that when something unreasonable finally entered my life, I kept reaching for normal explanations long after they stopped making sense. The first thing was the trash can. It was a dented green plastic can the landlord had left out back. The pickup company hated that old style because the mechanical arms couldn't grab it, so I had to drag it to the road myself every Tuesday night. One evening I came home and found it lying on its side near the edge of the yard. That was not unusual by itself. We got wind out there, and the ground by the ditch was uneven, but the lid was gone, and the bag inside had been opened and sorted through. Not torn by animals. Opened. The tied handles had been pulled apart. Empty yogurt cups, coffee grounds, takeout containers, an old receipt, a broken picture frame I had wrapped in newspaper a few days earlier. It all lay spread in a rough half circle on the grass, like somebody had searched it and decided none of it was worth taking. I stood there longer than I should have. I remember the air smelled like wet leaves. I remember looking toward the road and seeing no one. I also remember being embarrassed by how alert I suddenly felt. There is a shame that comes with being alone as a woman in a small town. You don't want to be the paranoid one. You don't want to call somebody because your trash was disturbed and hear your own voice sounding frightened over nothing. I picked everything up and told myself it was dogs. The second thing happened at work. A patient named Mr. Claiborne came in for his post-surgery exercises, and while I was helping him on the stationary bike, he asked if I lived out in Bell. I said yes. He told me they were advising women not to stay alone if they could help it. He said it in the casual, self-important tone older men use when they want credit for passing along information. I asked why. He looked surprised I didn't know. They had found a stolen truck abandoned off County Road 9, he said. There was blood in the cab, and some of it supposedly matched one of the transport officers. The truck had been dumped less than 15 minutes from Bell. I laughed a little and said, "Well, that's great." He said, "I'm serious. Lock your windows." I said, "I always do." That night I checked every latch in the house twice. For the next few days the news was full of it. Search teams in the woods. Dogs. Interviews with neighbors who claimed they had seen suspicious men by barns and gas stations and creek beds. The sheriff kept saying the same line, that there was no evidence Vale was still in the county, but residents should remain vigilant. People hear no evidence and decide it means definitely yes. Panic started spreading in that low, ugly way it always does in small towns, mixed with excitement and boredom. Men posted pictures online of themselves standing on porches with rifles. Women warned each other about white vans and fake utility workers, and men knocking after dark. Churches started prayer chains. The grocery store had a stack of photocopied flyers by the register with his face and a tip line number. I should have stayed with my sister in Dryden for a while. She asked me to. Lena had a husband, 2 boys, 2 loud dogs, and a house where nobody could have crossed the yard without setting off either the floodlights or the beagles. But I hated the idea of being displaced by a man I had never met. I hated the idea of sleeping on her pull-out couch and making her family nervous. I said I'd be fine. Everybody said be careful and meant well. But there was also that little charge in it. That thrill people get from being near danger without actually touching it. I could feel it every time someone asked if I was scared. At first I said no. Then I started lying. A few odd things happened over the next week. A back gate I never used was standing open one morning when I knew I had latched it. The shed door had a scrape along the frame as if someone tried to force it with something flat. One of my flower pots was cracked and lying on its side in the dirt. There were muddy marks under the kitchen window after a rain, but the yard stayed soft in places, and anyone could have left them earlier. Every single thing had another explanation. If I wanted one badly enough. I wanted one badly enough. The first time I truly felt watched, I was taking groceries in from the car after dark. It was colder by then, the kind of evening where your breath shows faintly in the headlights. I made 2 trips, carrying bags against my chest. On the second trip, when I reached the porch, I had the clear and immediate sense that someone was standing at the corner of the house, just out of view, waiting for me to turn my head. I stopped so fast a carton of eggs slipped in one bag and cracked. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anything, but I knew, with that sick certainty the body sometimes does give you after all, that I was not alone right then. Instead of looking, I went straight inside and locked the door. I put the bags down on the counter and stood in the kitchen listening. Nothing. I waited a full minute, then turned off the overhead light so I could see the yard better through the window above the sink. My own reflection stared back at me, pale and warped in the old glass bubble. The yard beyond it was mostly dark except for a slice of weak porch light and the shape of my car. No one. I told myself I was spooked by the news. I cleaned up the broken eggs and tried to keep moving. But that night I slept badly, and in the morning one of the bags I had left in the trunk was gone. There was nothing valuable in it. A 6-pack of seltzer, paper towels, cat food for my sister's cat, because I had picked up the wrong kind by accident and planned to give it to her. The trunk had definitely been closed. The car had definitely been locked. Nothing else was missing, and there was no sign of forced entry. I called Matt before I realized what I was doing. He had always been the person I called when something around the house went wrong, and apparently a part of my brain still reached for him on instinct. When he answered, I almost hung up. He sounded sleepy and irritated. I said I was sorry. I didn't know why I had called. He asked if I was okay. I told him about the trunk and the groceries and feeling watched. There was a pause, and then he got careful with his voice, the way people do when they think you might be a little unstable. He said, "You've got to stop reading this stuff online." I said, "I'm not reading it online." He said, "Then call the sheriff and tell them somebody stole your paper towels." I hung up on him. I am not proud of what happened next. I drove to Walmart and bought a baseball bat, 2 motion lights, and a can of bear spray, which I later learned was not legal to use the way I intended. I also bought one of those cheap window alarms that shriek when the magnet strips separate. I spent the evening sticking them all over the house like I was preparing for a siege. It made me feel ridiculous and better at the same time. For 3 nights, Nothing happened. On the fourth day, they found a body. It was a man from Dryden named Ron Bickham, who had gone missing after leaving work late. He was found in a drainage culvert less than 5 miles from my house. I did not know him personally, but I recognized the name because his wife used to come into the clinic. The details were held back at first, then came out anyway because they always do. He had been beaten in the face until several bones were broken. His throat was opened with something heavy and sharp. His right hand was almost severed at the wrist, hanging by skin. He had also been cut open across the abdomen after death. There was no sign of robbery. His truck was missing. When the sheriff finally said they believed the murder might be connected to the escapee, the whole county seemed to tighten at once. That was the day I packed a bag to go to my sister's. I didn't make it there. I got home from work later than usual because one of the therapists had left early sick. I threw clothes into a duffel, grabbed my laptop and charger, and called Lena to tell her I was coming. She said, "Thank God." She sounded relieved enough that I felt stupid for waiting so long. I was in the bedroom looking for a pair of jeans when I heard a sound from the kitchen that I can still replay in perfect detail. Not a crash, not a bang, just the soft scrape of a chair leg moving across linoleum. It was so ordinary that for a moment I thought I had imagined it. Then another scrape, longer this time, followed by the faint tap of wood settling. I remember standing with one hand in my open dresser drawer and knowing instantly that no normal explanation was left. The house was old, yes. It made noises, but I knew the sound of my own kitchen chairs. I knew the exact drag they made when pushed out from the table. Somebody was in that room with them. My first thought was not run. My first thought was impossible. I had locked the front door after coming in. The back door, too. All the windows were shut. There were alarms on most of them. No siren had gone off. So my mind rejected the obvious and went looking for something else. Some weird, harmless answer I had missed. Then I heard breathing. Not loud, not right next to me, but there, in the house, under the normal sounds of the refrigerator and the heat clicking on. Slow and rough, like someone with a cold. I stepped backward out of the bedroom without meaning to. The hall seemed very long all of a sudden. The only exit from that end of the house was past the kitchen. My phone was in the duffel on the bed. I made the stupid choice that probably kept me alive for another hour and nearly got me killed later. I grabbed the duffel instead of the phone and slipped into the bathroom at the end of the hall. I shut the door as softly as I could and locked it. The bathroom had one small window over the tub, too small to climb through unless you smashed it first, and even then it would be hard. I set the duffel in the tub, reached inside, found my phone, and called 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher answered. I whispered that someone was in my house. She asked my address, and I told her. She asked if I could see the intruder. I said no. She asked if I had a weapon. I said maybe a bat in the living room. She said, "Stay where you are. Officers are on the way." Then, because panic makes you stupid, and silence feels unbearable when something is hunting you, I said, "Do you think it's him?" There was a tiny pause. She did not say who. She said, "I need you to stay quiet and listen. Can you hear him now?" As if in answer, a floorboard popped in the hallway outside. I bit my hand to keep from making a sound. The dispatcher heard my breathing change and started talking low and steady, asking if I could barricade the door. The bathroom opened inward, so there wasn't much to use. I wedged the little metal trash can under the knob, even though I knew it wouldn't stop anybody. Then I sat on the edge of the tub and listened to footsteps move through my house. They were careful steps. That's what got to me first. Not rushed, not clumsy. He did not sound like somebody running wild or searching blindly. He sounded like a man who had done this before and knew people reveal themselves when you give them time. He went into my bedroom. I heard the mattress creak. A drawer opened. Then another. Something fell and rolled. The dispatcher kept asking questions I barely answered. I remember her saying officers were close. I remember thinking close meant nothing. It could be 2 minutes or 10. A person can do a lot in 1 minute with the right tools. The footsteps came back into the hall. They stopped outside the bathroom door. There is a specific kind of silence when someone is standing on the other side of a thin door, and both of you know it. I have never felt anything else like it. It was not the absence of sound. It was pressure. It had a shape. I stopped breathing altogether for a second. Then the knob moved. Slowly. A testing turn. The little trash can rattled under it. The dispatcher was saying something. I could not hear her over the blood in my ears. The knob turned harder. The door pushed inward an inch and held. He let go. I waited for the next push, the kick, the splintering impact. Instead, his voice came through the door. He said, "Emma." Very calm, almost polite. I had never heard his voice before, but I knew. Everything in me went hollow. I had not told the dispatcher my name. He had gotten it from somewhere else. My mail. Something in the house. Which meant he had been there long enough to look. He said, "You don't need to do this." His voice was ordinary. No movie monster growl. No wild-eyed ranting. Mid-range. A little rough. Tired. I did not answer. He said, "If you scream when they come in, I'll cut you before they shoot me." The dispatcher heard him then. Her tone changed immediately. She told me officers were outside. She told me to get down and stay away from the door. I slid off the tub and pressed myself beside the toilet. What happened next was fast in one way and stretched forever in another. A shout from outside. Somebody yelling sheriff's office. Another shout from the front of the house. Footsteps moved away from the bathroom. A crash from the kitchen. Then 2 gunshots, very close together. I screamed anyway. More shouting. Another shot. Then a sound I realized later was a body hitting the back steps. I stayed on the floor until someone pounded on the bathroom door and identified himself 3 separate times. When I opened it, there were 2 deputies in the hall with guns out. One of them pushed past me to clear the rest of the house. The other took my phone, which I had dropped, and guided me outside. Daniel Vale was gone. He had gone out through the kitchen window after cutting the screen and was hit once in the side as he ran across the yard. There was blood on the windowsill, blood on the grass, blood on the back steps where he must have stumbled. Not much, but enough. He had been close enough to touch the house all along. There was no truck in my driveway because he had come on foot from the woods behind the property. They found where he had been staying the next day. Not because of good police work, because he lost blood. A deputy following the trail found an old storm shelter half collapsed in the tree line on abandoned land behind my place. There were blankets in there, food wrappers, bottled water, a change of clothes, and a black spiral notebook sealed in a plastic trash bag. There was also a dead possum with its stomach opened, probably trapped for food. The notebook had pages torn out. On the pages still there were lists, roads, businesses, makes and colors of vehicles, a few names, including mine. I learned later how my name got there. About 2 weeks before the escape, while he was still in county holding for hearings, Vale had been assigned kitchen work. A volunteer group dropped off boxes of donated books and magazines at the jail, and among them was an old church directory from Bell. He had my name because the former tenant of my rental had attended that church, and the directory listed the address with our names handwritten next to photos for meal train deliveries and youth group rides years earlier. The old woman who used to live there had died. The directory had never been updated. My first name and the house address were enough for him to fix on it after the escape. Maybe because it was out of the way. Maybe because he liked the isolation. Maybe because once he got into my trash, he found recent mail and knew a woman lived there alone. This is the kind of thing people mean when they say random. But random isn't the right word. Random sounds clean. This was a chain of carelessness, chance, and one man's appetite crossing paths with my ordinary life. They moved me into a motel under watch for a few days after he escaped the house. My sister wanted me with her, but the sheriff's office said it would be easier to keep an eye on me there. I think what they really meant was that if he came back, they wanted him coming back to a fixed location they controlled. Nobody said that out loud. I barely slept. Every time a door shut down the hall, my whole body jumped. I kept seeing the bathroom knob turn. I kept hearing him say my name. People from the office texted constantly. "Are you okay? This is insane. Let me know what you need." It was kind. It also made it impossible to get quiet. Reporters started leaving messages because the scanner traffic had spread. I turned my phone off and sat in the motel room staring at a painting of a sailboat screwed crooked above the bed. On the second day, 2 detectives came to interview me properly. One was a woman named Garza, who looked exhausted in a way that made me trust her more. The other was a younger man who kept glancing at my hands, at my face, at the carpet, anywhere but my eyes. Garza asked careful questions. "Did he touch you?" "No." "Did he say anything else?" "No." "Had I noticed items missing from the house before the break-in?" I told her about the trash, the trunk, the open gate, the missing bag. She wrote everything down without once making me feel stupid for not reporting it sooner. Then she asked if I had seen the notebook. I said no. She said, "There are pages missing. We think he took them with him." I asked what had been on those pages. She took a second before answering. "Potential victims," she said. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because sometimes the body chooses the wrong response when the right one is too much. She said they believed he had been surveilling several homes and vehicles in the area. There were descriptions of routines. One house had dogs, so he crossed it out. One family had adult sons living there. Another address had a note beside it that said, "Husband Nights." My address had a loan written under it more than once. I asked if he had killed Ron Bickham. She said they were nearly certain. I asked if he had killed anyone else since the escape. She said they did not know. That answer sat inside me like ice. The search widened. Schools stayed open, but parents were tense. Half the county bought ammunition. Men I had known all my life posted online about taking matters into their own hands, as if they were waiting for an excuse. A woman in Bell accidentally shot her own dog after hearing scratching at a door. Somebody else called in a suspicious man behind a grocery store, and it turned out to be a homeless veteran digging bottles out of a dumpster. The whole place was becoming mean. On the third night at the motel, the deputies outside my room changed shifts. I noticed because one of the men from the previous evening, a square-faced deputy with acne scars, had been kind. He brought me coffee from the gas station and made a point of talking about stupid things like baseball, so I would not sit there listening for every sound. The new deputy was younger and nervous, too eager to prove he was alert. I hated him on sight for it, which was unfair. Around midnight, I heard a woman crying somewhere in the parking lot. I got off the bed and looked through the peephole. A car idled near the far end of the lot. Its interior light was on. I could see a shape moving in the driver's seat, and what looked like someone bent over by the passenger door. The crying came again, thin and strange. The young deputy outside my room had already stepped off the walkway and was heading toward the car. I opened the door a crack and told him not to go alone. He snapped that I needed to stay inside. I shut the door because he was right. Then I stood with my hand on the knob, listening. The crying stopped the second he reached the car. A man shouted. The deputy yelled and stumbled backward into view. The driver's side door flew open. A figure came out low and fast. There was a hard metallic sound, then another, and the deputy went down between two parked cars. I slammed the door and shoved the dresser against it without thinking. Outside, people were screaming now. Tires spun. Somebody pounded on a window. I dropped to the floor and crawled toward the bathroom because apparently my brain had decided bathrooms were survival. More gunshots cracked through the lot. One of them blew out the motel room window with a burst of glass, and for a second I was showered with pebbled fragments and cold air. Then a voice in the room said, "Stay down." The older deputy had come in through the connecting door from the room next to mine. I hadn't even known there was one because it was hidden behind the curtain. He dragged me by the back of my shirt into the bathroom, crouched over me, and radioed for medical. I remember seeing blood on his forearm and not knowing if it was his. Daniel Vale had stolen a car from the hospital parking garage that evening. He drove it to the motel, used a woman he had carjacked 10 minutes earlier as cover, and cut her badly enough to keep her screaming while he waited to see which deputy moved first. He stabbed the younger deputy in the neck and chest before the older one fired through the windshield. Vale fled across the highway on foot. The carjacked woman survived. The deputy did not. When Garza told me what had happened, she did not say the part everyone understood immediately, which was that Vale had come there for me. Maybe to finish what he started. Maybe because the police protection turned me into a challenge. Maybe because when he stood outside my bathroom and spoke my name, he already felt some kind of ownership over me. I do not know. I only know that after the motel attack, the tone around me changed. I stopped being a witness and became bait nobody wanted to call bait. They moved me again, this time to a safe house outside Dryden that belonged to a retired state trooper. It was brick, low, ugly, and much harder to approach unseen. There were deputies inside and out. Lena cried when she saw me because I had glass cuts on my face from the motel window and looked worse than I felt. Or maybe the other way around. People assume terror is constant when something like this happens. It isn't. Not if it goes on long enough. Terror spikes and drains. The body can't stay at that pitch forever. Instead, it gives you stretches of numb practicality. Eat this sandwich. Shower. Answer this detective. Sign this form. Try to sleep. Wake up shaking. Throw up. Rinse your mouth. Sit on the couch while two armed men watch a weather report. Think about laundry. Think about whether you left a candle burning in the old house. Remember the dead deputy. Start crying. Stop, because the crying feels useless. On the 5th day after the motel, they found another body. This one was a woman named Beth Kerwin, 58, who lived alone on a farm road north of Bell. Vale had broken into her house sometime overnight. She was found in her kitchen by her brother when she failed to answer calls. He had beaten her with a cast iron skillet so hard that part of her scalp was peeled back above one ear. Then he tied her to a chair and mutilated her. I won't give every detail because some of them still feel stolen from her, and because I saw the crime scene photos later when I should not have. But I will say this. He had used what was in the kitchen: knives, twine, a vegetable peeler, a hammer from a junk drawer. He took his time. She had defensive wounds so deep across both forearms that the bone showed in places. She had lived longer than any person should live through that. He also wrote something on her refrigerator in her blood. Not her. That piece never fully leaked to the public, but enough of it spread through law enforcement that I heard within a day. Garza told me because she thought it was going to get out, and I deserved to hear it from somebody who would not use it as gossip. I asked her if she thought he meant me. She said yes. I said that doesn't make sense. She said men like him don't need to make sense. But he did have a logic. I know that now. People picture serial killers as all chaos or all grand design. Most of the real ones are pettier than that, more emotional. They build rituals after the fact and convince themselves they had rules. Vale had preferences, not rules. He liked isolation, vulnerability, and control. He also liked being understood on his own terms, which is another way of saying he was vain. By surviving that bathroom, by being moved and guarded and talked about, I had become part of how he imagined himself. Beth Kerwin died because she was available when he wanted to express that. He did not want any woman. He wanted the one who had heard his voice and lived. That is a hard thing to carry without feeling contaminated by it. The safe house period blurs in my memory, but some pieces stay sharp. The smell of instant coffee and gun oil. The scratch of the wool blanket on the couch where I spent most nights, because the bedroom felt too closed in. A deputy clipping coupons from a newspaper at the kitchen table while his pistol sat beside his hand. Lena bringing me my own clothes and crying again, because one of my sweaters smelled like my regular detergent and made everything feel normal for 1 second before it didn't. I also remember the news shifting. Before, the coverage had been about the manhunt. Then it became about fear. A list of all the places Daniel Vale had passed through. A map. Talking heads discussing warning signs from his childhood, his prison behavior, whether the transport protocols had failed. Former classmates came out of nowhere to say he'd always been quiet. Neighbors from years ago said they knew something was wrong with him. Every person around a monster wants retroactive instincts. Nobody says I had no idea and left it at that. At some point, a reporter got hold of a photo of me leaving the motel with cuts on my face, wrapped in a blanket. They blurred half my features and used the image anyway. Someone posted my full name online. Then my old wedding photos got shared because the internet is a diseased place. There were comments from strangers telling me to stay armed, stay strong, pray, leave the state, watch the woods, trust nobody, make myself unavailable, cut my hair, change my car, stop whining, go on television, sue the county, marry a cop. It felt like being eaten alive by people who wanted a piece of the story. One evening, Garza sat with me at the safe house and did something no one else had done. She told me about Beth Kerwin as a person, instead of as evidence. Beth liked canning peaches. Beth ran the church rummage sale every spring. Beth's brother said she still sent birthday cards with $5 bills tucked inside to nephews in their 40s. Garza said her because I need you to know she was real before this happened to her. I thanked her and then cried so hard I couldn't breathe right. After that, I started asking more questions about Vale. Not because I wanted to understand him in some dramatic, red string on the wall way. Because he was already in my life, and ignorance felt weak. I wanted facts. Garza gave me what she could. He was 44. Grew up one county over. Father drank, mother vanished. 2 juvenile assaults before age 16. 1 animal cruelty charge dismissed when he was a teenager. First adult arrest at 19 for kidnapping and beating a sex worker he picked up near the highway. She lived because he got spooked by headlights and dumped her in a field. He did 8 years. After release, he worked odd jobs, mostly demolition and scrap hauling. The murders started within 3 years. There was never a stable partner, no long-term address. He drifted, but not randomly. He stayed just close enough to places he knew. He liked structures people forgot about. Sheds, storage units, culverts, storm cellars, gutted farmhouses. He did not drink much. He did not use hard drugs regularly. He planned, but his plans flexed around opportunity. What made him different, Garza said, was not that he enjoyed violence. A lot of killers do. It was that he enjoyed the period before violence almost more. The lead-up, watching, entering spaces, handling private objects. In one older case, they found a victim's house key in his things, even though he never used it to enter. He just wanted to possess the access. That landed somewhere deep in me because by then I knew he had been in my house before the day I heard the chair scrape. The trunk, the trash, the gate, the missing bag, the cut screen they found near the kitchen. He had been testing boundaries and enjoying it. I asked Garza whether he would come back even with all the attention. She said, "If he can, yes." I said, "Then why are we sitting here waiting?" She did not have a good answer. The break in the case came from something stupid. A volunteer searcher found a blue cooler in a creek bed south of Bell. Inside were bottled water, canned meat, a flashlight, and a packet of women's underwear still in the store plastic. One pair was missing. The cooler itself came from a bait shop off the highway. Detectives pulled camera footage from 3 days before the motel attack and got a grainy view of a man in a cap and jacket buying the cooler, batteries, and jerky with cash. The clerk remembered him because he paid with exact change and had blood on one cuff that he said came from a dog bite. The important part was what happened outside. Another camera from a neighboring business caught him crossing the lot and getting into the passenger side of a county road truck. Not stealing it, getting into it. The truck belonged to a subcontractor who did septic work for half the rural properties in that area. His name was Neil Haskins. Haskins was 51, divorced, minor criminal record, mostly DUIs, and receiving stolen property. He also owned a junk-strewn parcel outside Bell with multiple outbuildings and a pit where people dumped old concrete and scrap metal. He had known Vale years earlier through casual labor jobs and had once shared a holding cell with him on a misdemeanor theft charge. Haskins claimed he hadn't seen him in over a decade. When the detectives brought him in, he denied everything. Then they searched his property. What they found there did not make the news in full, and I understand why. Some things are too ugly to hand out over breakfast television. There was a shallow burn pit behind one shed with fragments of fabric, zipper teeth, and what turned out to be human phalanges. There was a locked chest freezer in a garage with nothing in it except old meat paper, duct tape, and blood in the drain seam. In the septic truck, they found fibers matching the motel room carpet and a partial fingerprint on the inside of the passenger side dash that belonged to Vale. In a buried barrel beyond the junk pile, they found one of Beth Kerwin's kitchen knives and the deputy's service radio from the motel lot. Haskins started talking after that, though talking is a generous word. Men like him never confess cleanly. They leak. He said Vale forced him. Then he said he helped because he was afraid. Then he admitted he had been bringing food and driving Vale short distances in exchange for money and favors that did not exist. He swore he did not know about Beth. He lied about that. Most important, he gave them a place, an abandoned hunting cabin near the state line, 30 miles away, accessible by logging roads. He said Vale had talked about using it if things got too hot close to Bell. The cabin belonged to Haskins's dead uncle and had no utilities. It sat in a patch of timber company land that hardly anybody used after deer season. They geared up to hit it before dawn. And here's where people want the clean ending. The perimeter, the tactical team, the loudspeaker, the killer cornered in a cabin and shot after a tense exchange. That would have been cleaner. It would have let everybody feel competent and finished. What really happened was this. There were tracks, yes, and signs somebody had been there recently. Canned food, dirty bandages, a blanket, a bucket used as a toilet. But Vale himself was gone. He had left maybe 12 hours before, maybe less. One of the state officers sweeping the area found fresh vehicle marks near a service road. Haskins, under questioning, suddenly remembered that Vale had asked detailed questions about the sheriff's safe house network years ago from some old trooper gossip. That is how I learned there was another leak. Not an intentional one this time. Not exactly. A dispatcher's husband had mentioned at a bar that officers were babysitting a woman at the old Kranz place. The Kranz place was the safe house. Small-town conversations did the rest. Garza came into the living room where I was sitting under a blanket and told me we were moving immediately. I said, "Where?" She said, "County Line Hotel until we know more." I started laughing again. That same wrong response, because the last hotel had gone so well. They rushed us anyway. 2 vehicles, Garza in front with another detective, me in the back of an SUV with 1 deputy. Lena had already been told to stay away. The roads were wet from earlier rain. The sky was going gray. Everything looked dead and cold and honest in that early light, which made what happened next feel even more unreal. A truck hit us broadside at an intersection outside Dryden. Not a little bump. Full impact on the rear passenger side where I was seated. The world snapped sideways. Glass burst. My shoulder slammed into the door so hard I blacked out for a few seconds. When I opened my eyes, the SUV was tipped into the ditch. The deputy beside me was folded at an angle no living person should be folded. I smelled radiator fluid, dirt, blood, deployed airbags, and something electrical burning. The front windshield was a white spider web. I heard a gunshot outside, then another. My door was crushed shut on the outside but bowed inward enough that cold air came through. I tried to move and nearly vomited from the pain in my shoulder and ribs. The deputy in the front passenger seat was making a wet, choking noise. The driver was still. Somewhere beyond the broken glass I could hear shouting, then one man's voice sharp with pain, then silence. I knew before I saw him. He came to my side of the vehicle carrying a pry bar. His face was thinner than the mugshot, grayer. There was an old yellow bruise along his jaw and a healing gunshot wound taped badly under his jacket where the deputy had hit him at my house. Up close, he looked less like a monster than a laborer who hadn't slept. That was somehow worse. He looked in at me and smiled a little, not warmly, not mockingly, more like relief. He said, "There you are." He jammed the pry bar into the bent door frame and pulled. Metal screamed. I kicked at him with one leg that still worked, but it was weak and stupid. He reached in, cut my seatbelt with a folding knife, and dragged me out by the coat. The movement lit my whole side on fire. I tried to scream and just made a ragged sound. Garza was on the pavement 10 yards away with blood all over her mouth. Her gun lay beyond her hand. She was conscious. I saw that much because her eyes were open and fixed on me. She tried to push herself up. Vale kicked her in the head without even looking. Then he pulled me toward the truck that had hit us. It was one of Haskins's work trucks with a stolen plate. The driver's door stood open. Haskins himself lay slumped over the wheel, shot through the face. Blood and brain matter were sprayed across the shattered side window. Vale shoved me into the passenger seat on top of glass, climbed in, and drove. This is the section people always want me to dramatize, and I can't. Not because it wasn't terrible, because terror that strong strips language down to the cheap parts. Pain, shock, movement, smell. I remember the washboard vibration of the road through the truck frame. I remember trying to work my numb right hand under my thigh because my left shoulder was useless. I remember blood from my scalp running into one eye. I remember Vale driving one-handed for a while because the other hand was clamped against his side, where the old gunshot wound had torn open again. I remember him breathing through his teeth every time the truck hit a rut. He did not talk much at first. After a while, he said, "You're harder to keep than I thought." I said nothing. He laughed once, softly. He said, "They made too much of you. That made it complicated." My seatbelt still worked. I clicked it on when he wasn't looking because I thought maybe I could jump if he slowed. He noticed immediately and cut it again without taking his eyes off the road. He said, "Don't be childish." We drove for what felt like a long time but was probably less than an hour. Dirt road, then narrower dirt road, then what barely counted as a road at all. The truck finally stopped near a caved-in farmhouse hidden by overgrown pines and dead equipment. There was an old barn with part of the roof gone, and a concrete block outbuilding beside it. Maybe once a milk room or storage shed. That was where he took me. Inside it smelled of mold, oil, and old animals. There was a cot, a lantern, plastic sheeting on the floor, several tools, a camp stove, and a 5-gallon bucket. He had prepared it. Not beautifully, not with movie villain neatness, but deliberately enough that my stomach turned over when I saw it. He zip-tied my wrists behind me and pushed me onto the cot. Then he sat on a crate and just looked at me for a while. I have gone over that time more than any other in therapy, in nightmares, in the ugly empty part of the afternoon when memory slips in uninvited. What did he want? What was he deciding? Why did he delay? The answer is that he liked the delay. Garza had been right. He enjoyed the before almost as much as the act, maybe more. He wanted me aware. He wanted me to understand that all the police movement, all the fear, all the dead in between, had ended here in a block-out building with him bleeding through his shirt and me half broken on a cot. He asked if my shoulder was dislocated. I did not answer. He said it probably was. Then he stood, found a bottle of water, and poured some over a rag. He wiped blood out of my eye with surprising gentleness. That may have been the sickest part of all, not because it was kindness, but because it was possession, like cleaning a tool before use. He said, "I had another one, but she wasn't right." I knew he meant Beth Kerwin. I turned my head and spat blood on his boot. He hit me so hard across the face that the room flashed white. Then he smiled again, almost pleasantly, because now we were where he wanted us. Real interaction, not fear at a distance. He began talking in pieces, not a monologue, not a confession. Fragments. How easy the first house had been. How stupid the deputy at the motel was. How Haskins had become a problem because he panicked. How my house had been better before the police came, because he could hear me moving around at night through the kitchen wall when he stayed in the old shelter. He said that last part while looking at me closely to see it land. It landed. He had been close enough to hear me sleep. I started shaking uncontrollably then, not from cold. He watched with open satisfaction. There were instruments on a table along one wall. Not surgical instruments exactly. Utility knives, pliers, a hammer, a hacksaw, kitchen knives from different homes, a box cutter, a cheap set of wood chisels. Some were clean, some were not. There were also rolls of tape and coils of extension cord. I tell you this because realism matters. Men like him do not keep elegant torture kits. They use what they can find, save what works, replace what breaks. The horror is not in ceremony. It is in how ordinary the objects remain, even after what they are used for. At some point he went outside, maybe to check the road, maybe to be sick from the wound in his side. I heard him retching once against the wall. When he came back in, he looked paler and meaner. He had taken pain pills from somewhere because his pupils were small and his movements had a loose edge. That made him more dangerous, not less. He cut the zip ties from my wrists and retied me with cord to a metal ring bolted into the wall near the cot. I think he wanted better control of my arms. My fingers were numb and tingling from where the ties had dug in. My left shoulder hung wrong. Breathing hurt. Every part of me wanted to fold in and disappear. Instead, I started talking. Not bravely. Not strategically at first. Just because silence was a void he controlled and words gave me something else to hold. I asked why me. He said, "You listened." I said, "You had women before me." He shrugged. He said, "You heard me and stayed. Then they took you. That's rude. I know how absurd that sounds." It was absurd. He talked about murder with the petty grievance of a man whose package was delivered to the wrong address. I kept him talking because every minute was still a minute. I asked if he killed Ron Bickham. Yes. Asked if he knew Beth Kerwin. No. Asked if Haskins helped with the motel. Yes, but not well. Asked if he was going to kill me. He smiled but did not answer. Then I asked whether he had ever actually gotten what he wanted from any of it. That changed him. Not much. Just enough. Something in his face tightened. Men like him build identities out of fear and legend and private fantasy. Suggesting emptiness underneath it is like pressing a bruise. He stepped close and gripped my jaw hard enough to make my teeth grind. He said, "Don't do that." I said, "What?" He said, "Talk like you know me." That was useful. Anger in him sped things up and made him sloppier. I wish I could say I had a full plan from then on. I didn't. I had fragments. Stay alive until dark. Keep him unstable. Look for objects. Watch his hands. Wait for a mistake. That was all. He did make mistakes. One was drinking from a bottle he had already filled with water from outside. Another was sitting down more often because his side hurt. The biggest one was underestimating injury. He assumed pain had made me weak enough to stop trying anything physical. He was mostly right. Mostly is not the same as completely. Late that afternoon, maybe evening, light started going gray through the one high window. He lit the lantern. The yellow glow made the room look greasy and close. He told me he needed to deal with the shoulder because I was shaking too badly. I thought for one wild second he meant he might let me go if I cooperated, which shows how far panic can drag reason from the body. What he meant was that he did not want me fainting too early. He forced my shoulder back into place against the wall while I screamed until my throat tore. I passed out for a few seconds after that. When I came back, he had taped the arm tight against my side with strips torn from a bedsheet. My face and chest were soaked with sweat. He looked pleased with himself. Then he laid out tools. I will not list everything he did because there is a point where details become contamination instead of truth. But I will not soften it either. He cut me. Not deep at first. Testing, threatening, enjoying the body's reaction. He used the flat side of pliers on my fingers, then harder. He split the skin over 2 knuckles with the edge of something narrow. He carved a shallow line across my thigh through my jeans, and then peeled the fabric back when it stuck. He pressed a blade under one fingernail until it lifted. He talked while doing it, not constantly, but enough to make it intimate in the worst possible way. Grounded, believable horror is not loud. It is a person stopping to wipe their hand on a rag because blood makes the grip slippery. It is someone asking if you're going to throw up before they continue. It is the little annoyance in their face when you move unexpectedly and make them cut wrong. At one point I did throw up, mostly bile. He stepped back so it wouldn't hit his boots and waited for me to finish. Then he laughed and said I was not as strong as Beth. That is when I decided I would kill him if there was any way at all. The chance came from the camp stove. He had set a pot of water on it earlier, maybe for coffee, maybe to clean something. He forgot about it for a while. The water had gone just below simmer and sat there with that faint clicking sound metal makes over low flame. Later, needing rags, he turned away from me to search through a plastic bin near the stove. His back was not fully turned, more like half, but close enough. The cord at my wrists had loosened slightly from sweat and blood. I had been working one hand against it for what felt like hours, losing skin from the sides of my thumb in the process. I got my right hand partly free and lunged for the pot. This is the part people think should look decisive and heroic. It did not. I almost missed the handle because my fingers barely worked. The pot tipped more than lifted. Boiling water and metal went over the stove and into his neck and shoulder in a sloppy, steaming spill. He screamed. I have heard people scream in pain before. Nothing matched that sound because it came out of a man who had been controlling every second and suddenly wasn't. He stumbled back, clawing at his neck. I used the moment to wrench my other hand free and went for the table of tools. He hit me from the side before I reached it. We both went down. My bad shoulder exploded with pain. He was partly on top of me, slick with water and blood, hitting and grabbing in unplanned bursts now. His face had changed completely. No calm, no polite voice, just fury and panic and the animal fear of losing control. I got hold of something on the floor. Not a knife. A chisel with a wooden handle. I drove it into the side of his neck. Not deep enough. He made a choking noise and punched me over and over in the face and ribs. I thought I was dying then. Truly. Not in some abstract future tense way. In the simple present. This is death. This pressure. This weight. This darkening edge. I pulled the chisel out and stabbed again. This time lower, under the jaw. Blood hit my hand hot and thick. He jerked backward, both hands going to his throat. I rolled away, grabbed for anything else, found the hammer. He was trying to stand. He looked stunned, more offended than afraid for one strange second, as if his body had betrayed him by being mortal. Blood pumped between his fingers in ugly pulses. I hit him in the temple with the hammer. He dropped to one knee. I hit him again. Then again. There is a point where hitting a skull no longer feels like striking a person. It becomes impact and resistance and wetness. The head moves in the wrong ways. Bone gives, skin opens. I kept going past the point of necessity because necessity had no clear line in that room. I had seen too much of him alive. I did not trust any motion to mean finished. When I finally stopped, my arm gave out and the hammer slipped from my hand. He was down on his side near the stove, one leg twitching. His throat was open around the chisel wound. The side of his head was caved in above the ear. One eye looked flattened. Blood had spread under him into the dirt and old oil on the floor. He made a bubbling sound once, then another, then nothing. I crawled to the far wall and sat there staring at him with the hammer still in reach. I do not know how long I stayed like that. Long enough for the lantern to burn lower, long enough for the blood on my hands to cool and tack over. Long enough to realize no one knew where I was, unless Garza had stayed conscious long enough to give them some direction from the road. And even then it might not be enough. I forced myself to move. The outbuilding door was hooked shut from the inside. Outside, the air felt raw and huge and wrong after the closeness. It was dark, though not fully black because there was a slice of moon and the thin wash of starlight on the yard. The farmhouse crouched nearby with windows punched out and one side sunk. The truck was gone. Of course it was gone. He had either hidden it elsewhere or somebody else had moved it earlier. I was alone. I went back for a flashlight and found one on the crate where he had been sitting. I also found my phone in his jacket pocket. It was cracked and dead. Then I heard an engine somewhere off through the trees. For 1 second, I thought it might be him still. Some irrational fragment of me refused to believe the body on the floor was enough. Then lights moved between the pines. Vehicles, more than one. Voices. Shouted commands. I walked toward them and must have looked deranged because the first officer who saw me yelled for me to stop and put my hands up even though I was barefoot, bloody, taped into a torn blouse and carrying nothing. After that, I remember pieces. Garza alive in a hospital bed days later with staples in her scalp, telling me they had followed a mix of Haskins's maps, tire impressions from the intersection, and an old property note from county tax records. She said if I had not gotten out when I did, they still would have found me. And we both knew that was partly for comfort. The truth was close enough to worse. I remember a doctor removing half a fingernail and asking me to rate pain on a scale from 1 to 10, and I nearly laughed in his face. I remember 2 state investigators wanting my official statement while I still had dried blood behind one ear, because procedure does not care about dignity. I remember being told Daniel Vale was dead at the scene and feeling nothing at all for several minutes. Then I remember throwing up into a plastic basin. The public ending was quick. Escaped killer abducts intended victim. Victim survives. Killer dead after confrontation. There were headlines about resilience and bravery, and a tidal wave of language I could not stand. They called me resourceful, fierce, a fighter. Local woman turns tables. I wanted to tell all of them to go to hell. I did not turn tables. I was butchered in a concrete room by a man who made a series of errors while trying to butcher me longer. That is not triumph. That is survival with blood all over it. Neil Haskins died in jail before trial. Officially suicide. I believe it. Men like that are cowards when stripped of proximity to bigger monsters. Beth Kerwin was buried on a windy afternoon with a church full of people. I attended from the back wearing long sleeves over the healing cuts on my arms. Her brother saw me after and hugged me so carefully it almost undid me. He smelled like cold air and mints. He said this was not your fault. I nodded because he needed to say it. It took me years to believe even half of it. As for the house in Bell, I never slept there again. Lena and her husband packed most of my things while deputies stood by. A lot of it was ruined anyway. Blood in the kitchen, evidence powder, broken glass. The landlord sold the place the next year to a man who flipped it and painted the siding gray. Someone else lives there now. Sometimes I think about warning them that the hallway floor still tilts, that the back porch sags, that if they stand very still by the kitchen sink at night, they might imagine they can hear breathing through the wall from the yard beyond. I never do. Trauma does not end when the killer dies. That is another lie people like because endings comfort them. Here is what came after. I could not stand closed bathroom doors for almost a year. I slept with lights on until the bulbs made my head ache. I startled at the sound of chairs scraping floors, and once blacked out in a diner when a bus tray clattered in the kitchen behind me. I developed a habit of checking windows so often that even when they were locked, I could not remember locking them. I moved twice in 3 years because each place eventually accumulated too many routes in and out, too many corners, too many patterns he might have liked. Intimacy became impossible for a long time. Not just sex, nearness. Someone touching my face unexpectedly. Someone standing behind me at a sink. A man raising his voice in irritation for reasons that had nothing to do with me. My body did not understand context anymore. It only understood echoes. There were legal proceedings, reviews, internal discipline for the transport failure that let him escape in the first place, and for the gossip leak that exposed the safe house. Families sued. The county settled some claims quietly. None of it brought back Ron Bickham or Beth Kerwin or the deputy from the motel or the transport officers or whatever other dead he left half-proven in his wake. Paper is paper. Dead stays dead. I went to therapy because the alternative was becoming unlivable. For a while I hated therapy. I hated the calm room, the careful voice, the way I had to excavate memory in measured pieces, while somebody nodded and named reactions as if my life had become a case study. Then I got lucky and found a therapist who did not treat me like a fragile object or a symbol. She let me be angry. She let me say ugly things. She let me admit that part of me missed the clarity of survival, because normal life afterward felt thin and irritating by comparison. Bills, dishes, commuting, people talking about office gossip when I had seen a man's skull break under a hammer. She said that was not uncommon and did not make me monstrous. It made me someone whose body had been dragged beyond ordinary scale. Years passed, not all at once. In the stupid daily way years do. Some facts remained. I still know what boiled skin smells like. I still know the weight of a carpenter's hammer at the moment it stops feeling like a tool and becomes the only future you can reach. I still know that fear is not dramatic when it is real. It is practical. It checks exits. It notes where the knives are. It looks at the distance between a chair and a door. It notices whether a stranger's eyes move over the room like he is measuring. That kind of fear never leaves fully once it has proved useful. People sometimes ask, usually after a few drinks when they forget manners, whether I think I sensed something before all of it started, whether there was a moment I knew evil was nearby. No, that is not how it was. I had small warnings and normal explanations. I had chances to report things sooner, maybe. I had the same lazy trust in routine that most people have because most days routine deserves it. The truth that scares them when I tell it is simpler than some supernatural instinct failing me. A serial killer lived within walking distance of my house for days, maybe longer. He listened to me move around my kitchen. He handled my trash. He learned my name from careless paper. He came inside while I folded clothes. He stood outside a bathroom door and spoke to me in a calm voice. Later, he used another woman's pain as camouflage in a motel lot. Later, he killed to say the killing had been meant for someone else. Later, he took me to a room he prepared with hardware store tools and ordinary household objects, because ordinary things are enough if the person using them has enough time and no conscience. That is the reality. No haunted house, no cursed bloodline, no devil in the woods. Just a man who got loose and kept being helped by error, ego, and the soft parts of society that assume danger will follow known paths. I wish I could say the story ends with peace. It ends with management. It ends with me building a life around the fact that once, for a stretch of days, I was the center of another person's violent obsession, and several good people died in the space around that. It ends with medication for a while, then less medication. It ends with me learning how to grocery shop without scanning every man in the parking lot twice. It ends with me eventually dating again, and then stopping, and then trying again. It ends with birthdays and work and a garden on an apartment balcony, and stretches of real happiness that do not cancel what happened, but sit beside it. Still, there are nights. A few years after all of it, I woke because I heard a chair scrape in my apartment kitchen. I lay there instantly awake. Every cell in my body switched on so fast it hurt. The room was dark except for streetlight around the blinds. I listened. Nothing. Then a soft thump. I got out of bed and took the heavy flashlight I keep by the nightstand now. I moved through the apartment barefoot, barely breathing, every old circuit alive again. I knew the layout, knew the locks, knew I had checked them. None of that mattered. The body remembers before the mind can argue. I reached the kitchen doorway and hit the light. One of the chairs had shifted because my cat, who was staying with me for a week while Lena's family traveled, had climbed onto the table and knocked a stack of mail down. He stared at me from beside the fruit bowl, offended by the sudden brightness. I sat on the floor and laughed until I cried. That sounds like a neat ending to tell someone, the kind that makes them smile with relief. It isn't an ending. It is only one example of how the past keeps reaching into ordinary rooms and laying a hand on your neck. The genuinely disturbing part, the piece I think about most now that enough time has passed for thought to be possible, is not the violence itself. Not exactly. It is how close it lived to normal life without changing its face. Before he entered my story, Daniel Vale was already in the county like weather, on television, in conversations at work, in flyers by cash registers. People discussed him while buying sandwich bread. I did laundry while hearing updates through the bedroom door. Somewhere in those same days he was opening my trash bag, touching my car, deciding where best to stand outside my house to listen. The horror did not arrive with music. It developed alongside errands. That is what remains unbearable when I let myself think too long. For a while after the trial reviews and funerals and news cycle moved on, I kept a notebook of details I did not want memory to distort. Smells, phrases, layouts, sequence. I was terrified that if I let time blur it, something about him would survive inaccurately and turn into the kind of myth these men collect. I wanted him pinned to truth. It was an ugly notebook. Messy, repetitive, full of things I wrote after waking from nightmares and things I copied from reports when my lawyer let me see them. I stopped adding to it years ago, but I still have it in a locked box under my bed. Once, during a bad stretch, I read through the whole thing and found a detail I had forgotten. In the shelter behind my old house, along with the notebook and wrappers and blankets, they found one of my missing grocery items, the paper towel pack. Not because he needed paper towels. He had sliced the packaging open and removed one roll. On the cardboard tube of that roll, written in pen, were 2 words. Still here. He wrote it before the day he entered the house, before the motel, before Beth. Still here. It should not matter any more than any other detail. Men like him leave traces. They mark things. They perform for themselves. But that one stayed with me because it captures the full shape of what I lived through better than the bloodier parts. Not sudden horror. Not explosive evil. Presence. A man staying close. A man refusing to be gone. A man moving just outside ordinary attention until ordinary attention finally failed. Every truly frightening thing in my life since then has been some version of that. The sense that a danger is not charging toward you, but lingering nearby, learning your patterns while you keep trying to explain it away. The missed call from an unknown number after midnight. The maintenance worker who stood too long in my doorway at an apartment and looked past me instead of at me. The ex of a friend who kept showing up at her job by coincidence until it wasn't coincidence. The online stranger who knows enough about your neighborhood to ask whether that coffee shop on the corner still closes early on Sundays. Most predators do not begin with attack. They begin with access. That is not the comforting lesson people want from me when they somehow find out who I am. They want courage, warning signs, empowerment, closure. I can offer some of those in pieces. Lock your doors. Report the thing even if you feel silly. Believe the pattern sooner. Leave when the room feels wrong. But closure is the one I don't have. Because sometimes, in the dead middle of an ordinary afternoon, I will be rinsing a plate or sorting mail or moving a chair with my hip, and I will remember that he listened to me in my kitchen wall. I will remember Beth's brother hugging me at her funeral. I will remember the deputy dropping in the motel lot. I will remember Garza trying to rise from the road after being kicked in the head. I will remember the way Vale looked when he realized he was dying, not in some grand cinematic pose, but with blunt confusion, as though a rule had been broken. And then I will go on with the day, because going on is what life demands, even when memory has its hand inside your chest. There is one last thing. A year ago, I got a letter with no return address. Real paper, folded into thirds. My current name and apartment written in block letters. My hands went numb before I even opened it. I stood by the mailbox cluster in the lobby and stared at it for a full minute. Inside was a single sheet torn from a legal pad. Blank. No message. No threat. Nothing. Just blank paper. I took it to the police, of course. They were polite. They said there was no way to know if it meant anything. Maybe a mistake. Maybe a prank. Maybe junk mail gone strange. They dusted it, found nothing useful, and that was the end of it officially. I told myself the same things. Maybe it was nothing. But that night I sat at my kitchen table under the yellow light and looked at the blank page until my eyes hurt. And what scared me was not that I believed Daniel Vale had somehow reached from the grave, or left behind a disciple, or any of the dramatic theories people jump to. What scared me was simpler. A blank page can mean anything the reader is already afraid of. That is how he lived. In the space before certainty. In the ordinary pause where you can still say, maybe this is nothing. Maybe the trash was dogs. Maybe the gate blew open. Maybe the chair moved by itself. Maybe the man in the parking lot is helping somebody. Maybe the voice through the door will go away. Maybe. Then the knob turns, and whatever life you had before that sound is over.